Hello, book lovers! Welcome to the 119th episode of Authors Love Bookstores, presented by A Mighty Blaze. My name is Kimberly HENSLE LOWRANCE, and I'm here today with
Joe MOLDOVER.
So Joe and I are usually not on the screen together. So if you're a regular watcher of this show, you know that we take turns hosting. But we come together for the holiday show, and this is our third annual holiday show. And we are very excited to be on the screen together and to be here with you. So if you are new to A Mighty Blaze and Authors Love Bookstores, just to give you a little rundown of our show, we broadcast weekly and we host conversations between authors and their favorite booksellers to shine a light on storytelling and creativity and the small businesses that enrich our community. And we have had booksellers and authors on from all over the United States, as well as Canada and Great Britain. And I love this show because it's such an honor to talk with writers and booksellers. And I love this episode because it's fun to be on the screen with you, Joe.
Thank you. It is fun to be on the screen with you as well, Kimberly. And thank you for that lovely intro.
So what are we doing today, Joe?
We are talking about books that we've loved this year. We're talking about the authors who wrote them, and we are directing people to the independent bookstores who are selling them so that they can click and buy and get great books for the holidays and support independent booksellers.
So the first time we did the show, I think I had something like 40 or 50 book recommendations.
Yes,
and
you did.
considering the show is like 45 minutes long, that did not give me enough time to talk, and I'm not sure how you fit in a word edgewise. So last year we had, I think, 12 each, but this year we've challenged ourselves to have our top 5 favorite, as well as the book that we'd like to see as holiday gifts for ourselves. So we'll see how well we do sticking with that list. Yes.
Indeed we will. Indeed we will. 45 is definitely too many.
So if we talk about, before we start talking about book recommendations, can we explain what kind of books we each read? Because that might be helpful, right? What kind of books do you read, Joe?
So I think people who watch the show know that I myself am a YA author, and I do read young adult literature, and I do have a great YA book to share today. I also love mysteries, and I hope to get a chance to talk about a mystery. And I also like reading nonfiction, and I kind of have eclectic taste in nonfiction. I'm going to be sharing a couple of really interesting nonfiction works today.
Excellent.
What about you?
I read anything except for horror. I can't do scary.
Right.
And I can't read any books where children are in jeopardy. You know, like they're kidnapped, they're orphaned, they're trapped. I can't do that. That's like a hard no. But I read literary fiction, contemporary fiction, romance, YA, mysteries. So I like to read a lot of different kinds of books. And I think that makes it super engaging. So we're excited to share our favorites. Before we jump into favorite, what are you reading right now, Joe? What's the book that's on your bedside table?
Well, I will tell you the book that I just finished, and then I will tell you the book that I am eager to jump into.
Yes.
So, I just finished reading Matrix by Lauren Groff, which I know you are. Yep, I know that you love. I read it for the very famous Bill's Book Group for Guys at Wellesley Books, of which I am a religious attendee, and it was our book for November. So I thought it was a great book. I really enjoyed it. I don't know if I liked it as much as you did, but it was a exquisitely crafted book.
Well said.
And I am very much looking forward to reading a mystery for over the holidays. William Kent Kruger, who is an Edgar Award-winning, New York Times best-selling Midwestern mystery writer and is fantastically talented, has a new book out called Fox Creek. I've lost track of what number book this is in his mystery series, but all of his books are excellent, and I can't wait to jump into it. Excellent. What about you?
So right now I'm reading Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. And she has a brand new book out called Foster, I think. And this book was recommended to me by two writers I really admire. And it's very short. So it's, it's perfect if you're someone who gets intimidated by big books. But it's beautiful. And it takes place in Ireland. And it's about, well, I'm like only halfway through, but it's about a man, takes place in the 80s, about a man who discovers something to do with a convent and laundries. And this was this scandal in Ireland where women were kept captive in these laundries to toil, and they often were unwed mothers and their babies died. And so it's this sort of moral dilemma that this man faces. I'm reading this right now. And then the next book I am looking forward to reading is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, which is like on all the bestseller lists. And it's about video game design and friendship and love and much more than that. So that's a must for me to read next. Okay, so that's what's coming up. Joe, start us off by telling us your favorite read of 2022.
I will do that. The first book I want to talk about, and one that I really want to highlight, is this one, The Lowering Days by Gregory Brown. This was an interview I did almost a year ago. We had Greg in January of 2022. The Lowering Days is Greg's debut novel, which makes me furious because it is a fantastic book, and there is no way in which it should be somebody's first novel. There's so much that could be said about it, but one thing that I will say is that this is the most atmospheric book and the book with the strongest sense of place that I have read in a very, very long time. It is based in the Penobscot River Valley in Maine, which is a place that I love. And there's no way that I could do a plot summary of this book. This book sort of defies Cliff Notes. But what I will say about it is that this book has strong mythic elements. This strip book is very, very lyrical. For anybody who's ever been to Maine or who loves Maine, they will just love spending time with this book. And this is one of these literary books that is both beautifully written and has unforgettable characters, and is also extremely exciting. I think for anybody who thinks that you can't have a literary novel with a fast-paced, exciting plot, I invite you to read The Lowering Days, because it is also a page-turner. So my bookstore for Lowering Days was Left Bank Books in Maine. Greg appeared with Left Bank, and that was a great interview. And I invite everybody to go and pick up a copy.
So just to remind our audience, we are putting links below the broadcast to all of the books we're going to talk about today. And specifically, we'll have links to the store that we're recommending as well. And you can catch that below. And then if you hop over to A Mighty Blaze on either Facebook or YouTube, you can go to the Authors Bookstores playlist. You can watch the interview that Joe did with Greg last year. That was a great description. I'm going to read that book now.
You should.
Okay. So my favorite book of the year is A Ghost in the Throat by Doreen Agrafa. And I apologize in advance if I have mispronounced her name. And it's an amazing, beautiful book. And I found it to be the kind of book that the best way to describe my response was that it made my head explode. Like, it's just so beautiful. It was an Irish Book Award nonfiction book of the year. It was a Guardian Best Book. It was shortlisted for the Rathbones Folio Prize. It was longlisted for the 2021 Republic of Consciousness Prize. And it's lyrical, it's vivid. I read a review that said it's a shapeshifter of a book, which I thought was such a great description. And it's nonfiction, obviously. It's about a woman who, a modern day poet, this woman who wrote the book, and mother, who is fascinated about a poem that was written hundreds of years ago, a very famous poem that people read in school in Ireland. It's written by a woman, and she writes this poem after her husband dies. And the modern day poet was like fascinated by the poem and wanted to understand the woman behind the poem. And often, too often, women are erased from history. So the woman's story has somewhat disappeared, even though her poem exists. And so it's this exploration of the author's journey to understand the poet, and then also the sort of struggles of being a creative person and having, she has like 4 small children under the age of 6 when she wrote the book, like all of those sort of modern day struggles. It's beautifully written. It moves back and forth between the past and the present, and it's gorgeously written in the way that poets, when they write prose, that just kind of blow your mind. So I think it's a perfect book for someone in your life who perhaps is looking for something they may have not already read, because I'm not sure how popular it is in the US. And also someone who just wants to be immersed in something that's going to make their mind fully engage with the words on the page.
Oh.
I should also say that this book, I got it at the library to read, and then when I was done, I again, my mind I had to go buy it, because it was like one of those books I just wanted to have, because it was just, I don't know, it's really beautiful. And I think probably it gets even better with subsequent readings.
Wow, that is a strong recommendation.
Loved it. Fantastic. Okay, what's next,
Joe?
Joe?
Book 2 from me. You ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, I have a confession. This is the type of thing I'm not supposed to say in public, but I hate football. I feel like the expectations I'm supposed to like yeah.
American football.
Oh yeah, American football.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's the World Cup right now, so we need to be mindful of.
I understand that. American football is just like incredibly, and it's not so much the brutality, it's not so much the violence and the brain injuries and all of that stuff. It's that I find it to be very, very boring. So, to me, it's just a bunch of people lining up, and then they run around for like a second, and then they mill around for 5 minutes, and then they sort of like line up again. And I don't get what's going on, and I find it incredibly boring. I've tried to go in person, I've tried to go to NFL games, I've gone to high school games, I've gone to college games. I just don't get it, and I can't make myself care. And so the reason that I'm sharing this information is to say that nonetheless, I loved this book. Yeah. And this book is another debut. It's another fabulous debut. It's another book, first book by Eli Craner. It's Don't Know Tough, and it is set in the world of Arkansas high school football. And Eli Craner is a high school teacher in Arkansas. He himself is a former football player. He played college football. He played pro football in Europe, which was like a really interesting story in and of itself. I think he played German professional football. He came back, he coached football, and then he went to work as a teacher for high school kids with behavior problems. And he wrote this book. And this book is classified as Southern noir. Now, what does it mean for it to be noir? Who knows? Not even Eli knows. I asked him. It is a mystery, but when you read it, you know that is what it is. It is dark. It is moody. It's violent. It's romantic. It's just one of those things where when you read it, you know what you have in your hands. I loved this interview. I saw Eli. We had him online with Dog Ear Books in Arkansas. That's his local independent bookstore. They appeared together. And the wonderful thing about this interview was that the bookseller from Dog Ear talked about encouraging Eli's growth as a writer, cultivating him as a writer, helping him to grow, giving him feedback. It was probably like the most beautiful example that we've had on our show of this developmental relationship between a new author and their local bookseller. And I just loved it. And they had like such great chemistry. So I just found the interview to be a total blast in terms of their connection with each other. This is one of these books that I have given out to tons and tons of different people. It's a great mystery. It revolves around a murder. I don't want to say too much about it because there are great spoilers. Eli accomplishes something really impressive in this book, which is early on in the book, the murder takes place, and the story is told by a revolving cast of characters, any one of whom could potentially be the killer. And even though we spend time in all of their heads, we still don't know who it is until the very, very end, and they all seem plausible. He also, for people in the audience who are themselves writers, Eli accomplishes things with dialect in this book that are extremely impressive. I think the usual advice to authors is not to try to write in dialect, and Eli defies that with one of the characters. He writes in this thick Southern Arkansas dialect, totally unfamiliar to me. It worked beautifully, and so from a craft point of view, it's a tremendous accomplishment. So, Don't Know Tough, Eli Craner, dog ear books. Go out and get it, whether or not you're a football fan. If you do happen to be a football fan, you'll especially love this book. It's a great book. It's a great book to kick back with over the holidays because it is both a total page turner and also just incredibly well written.
I remember that interview with Eli, and I think when we read books, I mean, maybe for me, I don't think much about the author, right? I think about the story they've created, but
Yeah.
I will say that he is someone that when we had him on the show, I was just so happy that he was achieving success because he's such a lovely person and was so grateful for his success also, and he's incredibly smart. And that, again, as you mentioned, the relationship he has with the bookseller at Dog Ear Books, I mean, it was very special. And so that's definitely an episode that's worth watch. We think every episode we do is worth watching, but that one's particularly great. And in the links below there, we also have information about that episode has been turned into a podcast. Some of the selected episodes across all of the Mighty Blades are selected by the podcast editor, Trisha Blanchett, and that one was selected, and so you can listen to that one as well.
And Eli has a second book coming out, so jump on the bandwagon now.
Excellent. So a completely different book would be my recommendation for my second favorite book of the year. I'm just doing them top 5. Doesn't necessarily mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But this is The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. So perhaps you've read her previous novel, Hamnet, which is, in my view, like a perfect book. And this one is just as captivating. And I had the great pleasure of interviewing Maggie for A Mighty Blades, and we're going to put the link below to that broadcast. She is incredible, and this book is really wonderful. It's about a young woman who, Lucrezia de Medici, in the 1500s, who is married off to this, in one of those political marriages, and is married off to the Duke of Ferrara. And then she's dead within a year of her marriage, I think. And so Maggie O'Farrell was like fascinated by her, and there's a painting of her. And so Maggie O'Farrell becomes like fascinated about this person and her life, and she imagines her life because there is some rumor that her husband killed her. So that's like, in history, there's like people who thought she died of like, I don't know, some sort of illness that killed people pretty regularly in the 1500s. And then there's some rumor that, she was murdered. So Maggie O'Farrell does some imagining, which she does so incredibly well. And it's perfect for someone who loves historical fiction. If you're obsessed with Italy, 1500s, it's so good. I love her. I love her books because you're just so completely swept up in the time period, and her writing's so gorgeous. And I should say this book I have recommended to so many people, everyone, because my love language is book recommendations. Like I love it when people call me up or text me. Just happened to be just yesterday, like a friend saying, I'm going on another book to read or book to listen to. I love recommending books. And so I usually start with, I've learned from the booksellers we've interviewed on the show, I always start with, well, what have you read recently that you really liked? And I find that this has been a go-to recommendation for me this year, no matter what people say that they've recently liked. So definitely worth picking up and putting underneath the Christmas tree, or the menorah, or whatever you're doing, whatever you celebrate this holiday season. And we have links below to purchase the book from Books Are Magic in Brooklyn, New York.
That's fabulous. And your interview with Maggie O'Farrell was fabulous, Kimberly. So I mean, that was one of the few interviews that you've done that I did not produce.
I was wondering where you were going with that.
No. I was saying I got to watch it as like a viewer. So I believe I was out of town when you did that interview.
Yeah.
So when I came back, I watched the recording because you can get for the audience, you can get all of the recordings online. So like I went to YouTube and I watched that video as just a sort of as from a viewer's perspective, and it was just like a great conversation. It was a fabulous conversation between you and Maggie O'Farrell. You did a great job interviewing her. She is a wonderful interview. I've seen her interviewed before. She's just one of those authors. There's some authors who can't really talk about writing. And she's somebody who really can. She can talk about the process. She can talk about the historical research. So I think everybody should not only pick up a copy of that book, but also go watch your interview with her. Because it's just like, it's so entertaining and it's so informative. So that was fabulous.
Thank you. I will say she is lovely. And the day that we interviewed her, it was like right after the Queen died.
Right.
And Maggie O'Farrell lives in Edinburgh. And so it's when the Queen was lying in state, and apparently there were crowds everywhere, and they had these huge screens up all over the city where they're broadcasting, I guess, like pictures of the Queen.
Right.
And it was sucking up all of the internet bandwidth in Edinburgh. So we were actually worried that we were going to lose her. It was like very stressful in the beginning on the technical side. I have read her other books. And she wrote a memoir called I Am 17 Brushes with Death, which is excellent also if you're a person who really enjoys memoirs. That one's very, very good. And yeah, it was just wonderful. It's always a great highlight of our work with the Mighty Blaze to get to talk to an author we really admire.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful for that. So
yeah.
Thank you.
The Queen dying and using up the internet was not one of those contingencies we prepped for, but you handled it. So it was great. All right, book number 3 from my side of things. So again, as I said before, I myself am a YA author. My debut book was young adult. I may or may not have a new YA coming out soon. It's too soon for me to say anything, but it could happen. But I only have one YA recommendation this year. I'm going in different directions, but I do want to talk about this book. So I very recently had had Melinda Lowe on the program. Melinda Lowe is a local author. She lives here in the Boston area near us. And she has written a number of books, including the National Book Award winner Last Night at the Telegraph Club. Which is a beloved YA book. It is a queer romance coming of age novel centered on Asian protagonists, and teenagers love it. But it's one of those YA books that very much crosses over to adults as well, and I think can really, really be read and enjoyed by adults. Melinda is not one of those YA authors like me who falls heavily into doing very, very voicey YA. Some of us will write in a first-person voice that's very, very teenage, very snarky, very sarcastic. We'll sort of really tap into our inner 17-year-old and go there. And Melinda writes in what I would sort of call a much more literary voice. And I think her work is marketed as YA. It revolves around adolescent coming of age characters, but in no way is it limited to an adolescent audience. Yeah. And this book, A Scatter of Light, is her follow-up to Last Night at the Telegraph Club. She shared with us in the show that she actually wrote it first, actually, even though it's being published second. And for people who loved Last Night at the Telegraph Club, we do get to reconnect with those characters in this book 50 years later. So even though it's not about them, even though it's not their story, we do get to it's in the same story world, and we do get to reconnect with those same characters. So it's not a sequel, it's not a prequel, but it exists in the same world. And it's a fabulous book. Melinda is a wonderful author. She, speaking about Maggie O'Farrell, Melinda Lowe is another author who is just wonderful to hear her talk about writing. She was just the headliner at Boston Book Fest, and she's just incredibly well-spoken when it comes to talking about process, when it comes to talking about the world of publishing. I could just listen to her talk all day. So it was a real pleasure to get to interview her. And if people haven't read Lesson at Telegraph Club, definitely need to pick that up, not only for the adolescent in their lives, but also for themselves. And then A Scatter of Light is the perfect follow-up. We are asking people to get it from Fabulosa Books, which is in San Francisco, which is a queer-owned independent bookstore, and they were a fabulous interview as well. So Scatter of Light, Melinda Lowe, go get it.
I have A Scatter of Light in my office to read. My daughter and I read the first book together, and so I have that one on my insane to read pile. And I really, again, she was a wonderful guest. Really a pleasure to talk to her. Okay, my next favorite, Mouth to Mouth by Antoine Wilson. We had Antoine on the show earlier this year, and we are putting the recommendation to buy this book from Diesel Bookstore in Southern California. And we've had them on the show twice, I think, and we had them on with Antoine. I love this book so much, and it's won a ton of prizes. It's such a smart book. It's about two men who meet up in an airport lounge. They went to college together, but they've kind of knew each other in college, but not really. And then they reconnect in this airport lounge, and one of them tells his life story to the other one. And it's so smart. It has an excellent ending and has a fabulous cover too, but it has an excellent ending. It's a lot about the art world, about Los Angeles. It's so good. It's so good. And I have to tell you, like I mentioned earlier, I love to recommend books to people, but I'm not pushy about it. I only recommend books if you ask for book recommendations. However, I was in the library a couple weeks ago, and there was a guy checking out at the circulation desk, and he had a stack of books, and he had Mouth to Mouth, and I could tell because of the spine, because the color, you don't often see this color in covers, and I literally ran across the library. I was like, "Oh, Mouth to Mouth! That book is so good!" And this guy, I've never seen before. It's who is this crazy woman?
Right, get away from me.
He was so calm. He was like, "Oh, I've heard it's good." But it's so good. It's so smart. I just loved it. I think I'm gonna give it away at Christmas to people. I have some people in mind who this would be perfect for. So definitely, yeah, it's so good. I wish I could. I'm not doing a great job explaining it, but if you want a smart book that'll make you think and that it will stay with you afterward, that's this book.
Yeah.
And we can see that the thoughtful bro himself, Mark Cecil, is in the audience. Thanks for joining us, Mark. I too like my hat. Thank you.
Well, Kimberly, that's a great recommendation from Mouth to Mouth. And as it so happens, my next rec is a book that I found about through Mark Cecil and Thoughtful Bro. So this is a timely moment.
Timely moment. Perfect segue.
Perfect segue indeed. So for anybody who doesn't know, and I don't know who that would be, Thoughtful Bro is a fabulous show here on A Mighty Blaze, as well as a podcast that you can get anywhere podcasts are available, provided by our guy, Mark Cecil. I recently had a long plane flight, Kimberly, and I kicked back and listened to a bunch of the podcasts, and they sound great. Awesome quality. I had a chance to produce for Mark earlier this year, and the book that Mark was covering was this one. It's Chasing Me to My Grave, and this book is by Winfried Rembert as told to Aaron Kelly. And Mark was interviewed, and this book has won the Pulitzer.
Oh.
And Mark interviewed Aaron Kelly, who is a local academic. I believe she's at Tufts, and Winfried's wife, Patsy, because unfortunately Winfried has passed away.
Oh.
And first of all, it's an incredible interview. So everybody needs to go and watch Mark with with Patsy and with Aaron Kelly. It's an interview that's both informative and it's also really emotionally moving. I mean, there were moments during that interview where I thought Mark was going to start crying. There were moments when I, as the producer, was choked up. It was just a very, very moving interview, and it motivated me to go out and pick up a copy of this book. And so I want to say a few words about it. And for we did all cry on that interview. For those of you who like ebooks and who like to read on an e-reader, don't do it. Go and pick up a physical copy of Chasing the Moon to My Grave. So for those of you who don't know, Winfred Rember lived an amazing life. He grew up in the Jim Crow South. He endured terrible persecution. He came very, very close to being lynched, to being murdered. He unjustly was convicted of crimes and spent 7 years on a chain gang in completely unspeakable conditions. He endured really, really profound physical and emotional, psychological trauma from his earliest years up through his adulthood. And his life story, as told to Aaron Kelly, is an incredible window into that world of the Jim Crow South and American racism. But Winfred Rember was also an artist, and he produced beautiful works of visual art. And he converted his trauma and his pain into really incredible pieces. And I almost don't want to hold them up for the camera because I feel like it won't do it justice. But the book recreates dozens and dozens of his works of art on the page, and it's something that you really need to hold in your hands. And when you read it, you hear Winifred's voice. Aaron Kelly was somebody who interviewed him and who set this down. But it is his voice. It's a unique, idiosyncratic voice telling a story that needs to be told. But then as you're reading it, you'll turn the page and the story will segue into a work of art that Winifred created. I mean, you can't appreciate it over the camera, but they're incredible pieces. And so this is a physical book that I just strongly encourage people to get. It's moving. It's in its own way, it's inspirational. It's infuriating. It's incredible art, and it won the Pulitzer. And I did not know about it until I produced for Mark Cecil, and I'm very grateful that I was introduced to it. And I put down, because this was not a book that we did on our show, it was not connected with an independent bookstore. So I'm just going to do a plug for my local indie that I always love and I always put in plugs for. It's where I bought this book, Wellesley Books in Wellesley, Massachusetts. Go pick up a copy.
Thank you for sharing that. It's such a great example of how vital books are, to tell stories that have not been told before and to hopefully change minds. So thank you. I'm going to add that one to my holiday list. It's hard to segue from that one, but I'm going to try. And so for my next recommendation, I just want to tell you I cheated because I have a tie. Is it like this top 5 thing is just impossible? I should just say I read so many wonderful books this year, and choosing 5 was just impossible. Even though I was the one who suggested we limit it to 5, I still found it really hard. So I'm going to recommend 2 for my number 4 slot. And the first one is, I don't have this in hard copy, so I'm just going to show you the cover, which is Now Is Not the Time to Panic by Kevin Wilson. He is the author of previous novel called Nothing to See Here. And this is his new book. It came out this year. I believe it came out this fall. And I loved it so much. It's about 2 sort of loners who connect. You always feel like with Kevin Wilson that you're in sure hands, that he's telling a story and he's going to tell it really well, and that your time is going to be extremely well spent. I think I read a lot about the book in preparation for today, and I think one of the reviews described it as Now is not the time to panic. Wilson explores the tension between adolescent creativity and cultural paranoia, that urge to affect the world and the cost of doing so. It's about, again, two adolescents who connect, have a sort of connection, lose sight of one another, and then find each other later on in life. And one of my favorite quotes I've read in a book this year came from this book. And this is it. It's he writes, "This was the beauty of obsession. It never waned. Real obsession, if you did it right, was the same intensity every single time. A kind of electrocution that keeps your heart beating in time." That was just beautiful. He's such a beautiful writer, and it's such a great story, and I really loved it. So that is one of my number 4s. And then that is tied with a book I found. Oh, I should say there's a link to that book below. And it's from the Poison Pen, which is a bookstore we had on the show. Poison Pen is on the Southwest. You can buy it from them. It's below. And then it's tied with, let me find the graphic to put it up, When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. Now, Kelly is a writer of middle grade YA, and this is her adult novel. We have a link below to Politics and Prose, which is a bookstore in the DC area. And we're linking to them because actually I found out about this book from the bookseller. We had them on the show earlier this year. And this book was one of the books they recommended, and I went to go read it. And it's literally about this sort of alternate America where one day women turn into dragons. They are no longer women. They literally become fire-breathing dragons. Not all women, though, but just a subset. And it explores the burden of not talking about trauma and not talking about loss, and loss in specifically loss, because it's about one young woman and her how do I phrase it without giving it away? A member of her family becomes a dragon, and she is and her family never discusses it, and she's kind of left with that yearning to understand. And in fact, thousands of women, hundreds of thousands of women become dragons, and no one ever talks about it. And so what happens if something bad or different happens and you choose to hide it? What is it like for the children that have to go on after that, and the men and the women who are living with that sort of that loss? So it's really, really fascinating, and it's kind of wacky because you're like, dragons, but she's such a successful writer, and you feel very confident that the risk that she is asking you to take on, or the leap that you take as a reader, women can turn into dragons. You feel confident that this is done really well, and that it's believable, and that I don't know, I keep saying shorthand of describing another writer today, but you do feel very confident that Kelly Barnhill is telling you a story, and she's going to do it really, really well, and not being silly about it, right? Having this very fantastical example of loss, difference. I don't know. It's so good. I really liked it. I keep thinking about it. I keep thinking about would I have been a woman who turned into a dragon, or would I have been a woman who stayed behind?
It sounds fantastic. And
it's really good.
To the Kevin Wilson book for a minute, Kimberly.
Yeah.
I have to say, Nothing to See Here, his previous book.
So good.
It was a book that made me so wish that I had written it. Have you ever had that reaction to a book where you read it and you're like, oh damn it, I should have written that book, that. I haven't had that strong a reaction to that book in a long time, but I felt that way about Nothing to See Here. I felt it made me so angry. It was just so good, and I loved it. And so I have not read the new book yet.
It's really good.
And I know that in just a minute we'll be getting to our wish list. And I knew you were going to be talking. I would have picked that book for the book that I wanted, because I knew you were going to be talking about it. So I picked a different one. But for anybody listening to the show who wants to give me a present,
hint,
hint, that Kevin Wilson book, I'm very excited about.
Yeah, I love that book. I just love the way his sensibility and his perspective. I find it I feel like quirky is not the right word, because it's not doing him justice. He has just sort of a very fascinating point of view, and I feel like he develops these characters that are people that you want to get to know, and I don't know, and I'm glad they're on the page. I don't know, I just
he has such a great sensibility. He has great.
Yeah.
I feel like he's funny, but he's also wise in a way that I just sort of love.
Yeah, and I think, you know, reading as much as we do, I imagine you have a short list of sort of writers, and when they have a new book coming out, you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to read that. Like, oh,
Yeah.
and I feel like Kevin Wilson is one of those people. When I hear
yeah.
his new book, I'm like, oh yeah, definitely going to read that.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Okay, next up.
Okay, we're up to my fifth book. We are up to my fifth book. We are getting there. This is like, Kimberly, this is so much more efficient than doing 45 books. This is the way to do it.
I know, but there's so many good books out there.
Oh, I'm sorry. We just have to be disciplined. For my fifth book, this is the only one that I don't have a physical copy to wave around. But it doesn't really matter because this is one author who really needs no introduction. So I had the opportunity this year to interview Josh Ritter with regard to his second novel, The Great Glorious Goddamn of It All. So Josh Ritter is, as you know, Kimberly, and as anybody who watched the show knows, is an absolutely phenomenal singer-songwriter. I've lost track of how many albums he has out. He has a bunch of albums out going back almost 20 years. I've been a fan of his music for so long. I love his music. I love listening to him. But he's also a novelist, and this was his second novel. It is set in his native Idaho. And it is, again, it's one of these novels that's very difficult to describe. It's almost like a novel-length tall tale. It's sort of like a folk tale. It is larger than life. It is this sort of American myth. It has this sort of legendary quality. It is set at the turn of the 20th century in the dying timber industry, where lumberjacks were performing sort of extraordinary feats of daring out in the woods. It has good and evil. It has high adventure. It has romance. It's really an extraordinary book. And Josh came on the show. He was a delight to interview. And Kimberly, as you know, Josh did something that no other author has done for us. He took out his guitar and he played a song, and it was spectacular.
It was spectacular. I was going to mention that if you didn't, but it was actually like a highlight of all of our shows, I will say. It was
a total highlight. Like, I got off the screen and we just let Josh sit there and play a fabulous song for us. Yeah. And so I recommend the book Great Glorious Goddamn of It All. Pick up a copy from Book People of Moscow out in Idaho. Watch our interview to see Josh Ritter in a one-time personal performance that just completely blew my mind. Indeed, we do have a good friend who is going to be having a forthcoming book that is an American tall tale that involves a lumberjack. We're looking forward to Bunyan by Mark Cecil, which will be out not soon enough, and I'm sure we will have on the show.
Yep.
And for those members of the audience who are saying that they miss Kimberly's long list, we didn't ask for feedback. This is not one of those shows. Kimberly needs to be limited, otherwise she's going to go out of control. So
I will happily make a long list for anybody who asks.
All right, do your fifth book.
Shocker, tie for number 5.
Oh my God.
I'm so terrible. Okay, so here, let me find. So this book that I'm going to recommend has been on all the bestseller lists, and justifiably, is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. This book is so great. We have a link to purchase it from City Books, which is this amazing indie bookstore in Pennsylvania. Bonnie Garmis, this is her debut novel. It's so terrific. I actually first heard about this book. This is wacky. I, like many other people during the pandemic, started following different people on Instagram, and now I can't remember his name. Who's the actor who was in The Devil Wears Prada? Stanley Tucci. So Stanley Tucci, I started following him on Instagram because he was making cocktails. And one day he was making a cocktail on Instagram for lessons in chemistry because his wife is a literary agent and she represents this this author who wrote this book. I of course was like, oh, Stanley Tucci's making a chemist, like a cocktail. I gotta read this book. And I listened to it as an audiobook. It's fantastic. It's a fantastic audiobook. They're making into a movie right now or a limited series with Brie Larson. It's about a woman who's a chemist in the 1950s and this like incredible sexism she goes through to try to get to receive the respect that she deserves. She's brilliant, and then through a series of twists and turns, she actually becomes the host of a highly successful cooking show. And so, which I mean, if you've ever cooked before, you know cooking is chemistry. So it's a story of love. And so there's a fantastic dog named 630 who narrates part of the book, which sounds crazy, but it's like fantastic. There's also a lot of rowing and love, and it's like really, really smart and just such a wonderful book. And it's one of those books that when I keep seeing on the bestseller list, I'm like excited for because it's so well deserved. And it would make a great gift for anybody who wants. First of all, it's great if you're an audiobook person, definitely worth listening to. It would be a great gift for someone who likes a book. Well, it just wants to read something where they're going to be totally swept up in the story and like get like mad about a woman who was wronged, who then in the end gets triumphs. It's really good. And that one I am pairing with Half Blown Rose by Lisa Cross-Smith. We had Lisa on the show, and we're going to include the link below to that episode. She was on with Carmichael's, and we'll include a link to that. I'm a huge Lisa Cross-Smith fan. I think this is her third book. I've read all of them. She has another book coming out next year. I can't wait to read. She writes these like sexy books that are just like, there's a perfect book to curl up and read on a snowy afternoon. And this one is about a woman who finds out that her husband has this like really terrible secret and she runs away to Paris. And they're separated and she's trying to create a life away from him and figure out what she wants. So it's definitely a story about love, about finding your own way. And obviously, if you're even a little bit interested in Paris, it's great for, imagining yourself in the city of light. I love all of Lisa's books. So highly recommend.
I mean, they sound incredible, although don't think we didn't notice that you've done 7 instead of 5
Yeah,
books.
of course.
Bending the rules.
Absolutely.
Approve. Okay, we are reaching the end of our time, and so it is time for us to do our wish list. So we're going to do. I'm going to do one book. You're going to do one book that you are hoping somebody will give you for Christmas. Although I will also know that you're again bending the rules on this one. I'll leave it to you to disclose to the audience how. But I do want to talk about the book that I'm hoping to get. Kimberly, from time to time over the almost 3 years we've been doing this show, you have given me feedback about my behavior, and I routinely disregard it, as I will now, because I told you the story of this book ahead of time, and you said that it made me sound pretentious, but I don't care. So I am going to. I just don't care. This is a book I am very excited about, and the reason I'm excited. Well, first of all, let me just say this is a nonfiction book. This is one of the few nonfiction works that we've done. And I'm hoping to receive it. This is Papyrus, The Invention of Books in the Ancient World by Irene Vallejo. This is Irene Vallejo's English language debut. She is a Spanish scholar and fiction writer, and who then went to Oxford University in England on a fellowship and wrote this book, which is her English language debut. And it is about exactly what it says that it's about. It's about the way in which books as physical objects were invented in the ancient world. It's about that history. It's about the intersections of that history with the great historical arcs that we're familiar with. It's about the conflict about books. It's about the disruption of books. It's a history novel, a history book about books. That I am very, very excited about. It's getting great reviews. The New York Times says that it elegantly explores how scrolls and codices laid the cultural foundation of the West. It's a starred review and book list. It has all sorts of great feedback. Kimberly, I came across this book on my recent trip to Oxford to visit my son who is studying there. Um, and I came across it in Blackwell's bookshop, which is a fabulous bookstore in Oxford where it was prominently displayed. You can go to Blackwell's and you can order a copy. They will ship to the US. And I think this is a very exciting book. This is an author who I didn't know anything about until now, largely because I only read in English. But I think this is going to be a major book. I think people are really going to be excited about this. I think this is going to be one of these sort of scholarly nonfiction books that really kind of breaks through to a bigger audience. And I hope to receive it.
For the record, I think the book sounds amazing. I was merely mocking your presentation of the book to me, which was a lot of like, I went to Oxford.
Yeah, I know.
Stuff, but it sounds terrific, actually. I really love your recommendations tonight. Like, as you're talking, I keep thinking of people I should buy those books for. Okay, so for my final recommendation, or the book that I'd like to see this holiday season, so I'm just going to say that I am a tricky person to buy books for. And it's so tricky, in fact, that no one in my family buys me books. And partly, like, it's just the truth. And partly that's because I read a lot, and it's kind of hard to find something that I haven't read or don't have an opinion about. And I imagine that there are people out there who are like me. I do not think I'm the only one. I know I have some friends who are voracious readers and read everything. And so what do you do if there's someone in your life who has read, like, all the new books that are out? How do you get them something that they haven't gotten for Christmas? Well, this, or Hanukkah, or whatever holiday you celebrate at this time of year. Well, this is my recommendation. This is an excellent opportunity to pre-order a book that isn't yet out. So the way to work around someone who's read everything is to buy them something that isn't even out in the bookstores yet. Right? So pre-ordering is when you go in to a bookstore, or you go online to a bookstore, your independent bookstore, or even bookshop.org, and books that are coming out in 2023 are already online for purchase, and you pre-order them, and then they'll be shipped directly to the person when they're released. So again, they can't have read the book yet because it's not out. So pre-orders, they're really valuable for authors because pre-orders matter when marketing dollars are allocated, and they kind of help publishers get a sense of what's going to be hot. So if you have someone, again, you can't figure out what to buy them, you can pre-order them a book. You can get recommendations for pre-orders from your favorite independent bookseller. They know what's coming. They read ahead, at least a year in advance. And so here's some examples. Here's one example that I have already read that is fantastic. It's coming out next year. It's Romantic Comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld. Curtis has been on the show. We had her on to talk about her book, Rodham, and she was on with Prairie Lights Books in Iowa. And we have a link below to purchase Romantic Comedy, to pre-order it from Prairie Lights. And this book is so good. It's about a woman who's a writer for a television show that's sounds a lot like Saturday Night Live, and her relationship with one of the guest hosts and what happens. And it's quintessential Curtis Sittenfeld. It's like fabulous dialogue, wonderful scenes, settings, characters you really care about, characters you think about after the book is over. I devoured it. Honestly, I just devoured it. I loved it so much. And she's one of many, many people who have fabulous books coming out next year. We've had on the show Anna Napolitano, who wrote Dear Edward. She has a new book coming out next year. Julia Fine, who's been on the show, her third book, Medela in the Dark, is coming out next year. We have two people from A Mighty Blaze. Trisha Blanchett, who's actually producing for us today. She has a book coming out next year. Actually, three people. Julie Gerstenblatt, Daughters of Nantucket, which is a historical fiction set on Nantucket. It's fantastic. That's coming out next spring. Jane Roper has The Society of Shame coming out next year. Maurice Carlos Ruffin just announced he has a new book coming out. I mean, there are so many authors who have books coming out in 2023. So if you, again, have people in your life who are like me, very difficult to buy for, buying them something that they can't get their hands on yet is a great way to respond to that holiday pressure. And all I gotta do is, print out the cover, wrap it up. Here you go. It'll be shipped to them directly.
Love it.
So there, I managed to get like 6 books in while I was supposed to be talking about one.
That was very well done. I love that you're doing the pre-orders, and I also love that you mentioned Trisha, Jane, and Julie's books. Because it's going to be 2023 is going to be a huge year for Mighty Blaze authors. So it's very, very, very exciting.
It is.
Well played, Kimberly. You got in quite a few books.
I know, but now we're at the end, and I feel like I didn't do a good job selling any of them. When you love a book so much, and then you feel like, oh, I should have said this.
No, I think you did a great job. I think that all of the books sound absolutely fantastic. And
yours too.
Thank you. And to the audience, thank you for joining us for our 3rd holiday special.
Mm-hmm.
Kimberly, it's been a complete delight to chat with you over this last hour about these books, and of course to do the show with you over the last year. As
years.
As always, to the audience, we exist to support independent booksellers. We have tons and tons of links in the comments to independent booksellers to buy these and other books. So if you're going to be doing some holiday shopping over the next month, please go ahead and use some of those. Have those books shipped to you. Support local independent book selling. Support authors. It makes us so happy. Next week, we are back for the 120th episode of my Authors Love Bookstores. We shall be going to Wyoming for the very first time because I am going to be interviewing best-selling author CJ Box, along with his favorite local indie, Wind City Books in Casper, Wyoming. CJ Box is an amazing writer. He's an amazing character. He's a great figure in the world of fiction. I can't wait to talk to him. So I hope that you'll tune into that. I hope that you will support Wind City Books. We are down to only 4 more states. So Kimberly and I have been trying to interview independent booksellers in all 50 states, plus Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. We've also gotten out to the UK and to Canada. We only have 4 states to go. I'm going to say what they are. Indiana. Come on, John Green. Return my calls. Louisiana. Nebraska. And oddly enough, Maryland, which you would think would be more literary. They're not representing. So for anybody out in the audience who has any connections with independent booksellers in Indiana, Louisiana, Nebraska, or Maryland, feel free to reach out to us, reach out to those booksellers. We absolutely plan to check off those boxes in 2023 and we will have interviewed all 50 states. And we have other states coming that are booked. They just haven't been held yet. Like Oklahoma's coming up, Hawaii's coming up. Mm-hmm. So, and I should say the 4 states are outstanding. It's not for a lack of trying. We've tried. It is not for lack of trying. Yeah. And we've gotten wonderful guests before by, mentioning this on the show. We had Isabella Mondelano on the show who came to us through this little appeal. So if you know someone, please get in touch. Get in touch. All right, Kimberly, happy holidays. Happy holidays to you too. And to the audience, happy holidays. Stay well. Keep reading.